So how's everybody doing? Middle of the afternoon, we're hitting that slump. Hopefully we're not all going to fall asleep in my talk. I'm going to try and keep it light. We will have time for questions at the end, but if you want to ask something cromulent, feel free, speak up. This is Laziness at Scale. I am Adam McCormick. I work for Meta. I'm a software engineer. I work in our Facebook app reliability team. That means if you've got Facebook on your phone, you can blame me for that. So this was my original schedule. I thought I had an hour. I don't have an hour, so we're going to skip over a couple things, but we are going to talk about the engineering mindset, how you deal with management, and the delicate art of saying no, which is about the most important thing you can possibly learn as an engineer. There will be time for angry heckling. First, the engineering mindset. Now, how many of you are trained engineers, like actually got a degree from an engineering school? Good, more than a typical programming group. I like that. Means you'll understand what I'm talking about on a visceral level. First off, I want people to understand that engineering is not science. It's really common. People believe that you're smart, you're good with math, you must be a scientist. But engineering is not science. Something that resonates with me, and I'm going to get to why this is important. I quote Aiken's laws of spacecraft design a little bit. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, Aiken is a professor at Caltech, and he was instrumental in a bunch of the NASA launches through the 80s and 90s. He teaches a core course on how to build spacecraft, but he established a group of something like 90 laws, and what they are is critically important pieces of engineering wisdom. They will tell you more about how to deliver any project, be it software, be it a bridge, be it a spacecraft, than any other source there is. So I'm going to litter these throughout the talk. First one's this. The odds are greatly against you being immensely smarter than everyone else in the field. I know as engineers, you like being right. Scientists like being right too. Mathematicians love being right. We think differently, but that doesn't make us necessarily more right more often. So first, this is how science works. And I've got my nice Mid-Journey generated fellow up here, my typical scientist. Science starts with observation. Create theories, produce rules, validate, and then try to repeat that process over and over and over and over again. You're trying to create knowledge. I like to say science improves the definition of mediocre. Engineering, on the other hand, starts with requirements. It's not about knowledge. It's not about discovery. It's not about the unknown. Engineering is about satisfying a need, choosing a gap, defining that gap, and most importantly, knowing what the tolerance of your solution is. I like to say engineering makes mediocre cheaper. So first story. There are going to be stories littered throughout this. Most of them are actual stories. This one is a parable. I call it the red ball parable. Now, what we've got here is you've got a scientist, a mathematician, and an engineer, and they've all been told to measure the volume of a red ball. As you might expect, mathematician pulls out calipers, runs his equations, calculates the volume of the red ball. Scientist says, but what if it's not a sphere? Coats it in soap, dunks it in water, measures the displacement. The engineer, on the other hand, says, why would I do that? I'm going to look it up in my red ball reference manual. I got the serial number right here, and I know the engineering specs for the whole thing. What's the takeaway? Why would we reinvent if we don't have to? Don't worry about clever solutions, writing things from scratch, new technology, resume-driven development, all that stuff. That's not engineering. That's busy. Instead, learn the patterns that work and apply them. Apply existing solutions when those solutions are available. Use the well-supported technologies, not the new shinies. And stick with things like meta-analysis and the minimum viable deliverable. Future-proofing, radical modification, these are things that never lead to great outcomes. Big impact, sure, but also big risk. And engineering is about satisfying the requirement, not just doing stuff. All right, second point, engineering is a concrete approach to the world. Engineering is done with numbers. Analysis without numbers is only an opinion, as I'm sure everyone who's ever talked to a TPM found out really fast. Another story time. So this is about a mode on your phone called background restricted mode. Anyone who's a mobile developer has probably heard of this. Basic idea, OEMs hate it when you use battery because it makes them look bad. Now, in this particular case, Mr. Zuckerberg himself looks at his phone, his Samsung phone, and it tells him that Facebook is being put into background restricted mode for using too much battery, for crashing too often, for whatever arbitrary reason the OEM wanted to put us in background restricted mode for. Now, Facebook as an application is the single most complex mobile application ever made, bar none, on any platform. It's going to crash more than everybody else, at least everybody else who has similar levels of engineering tech. It uses more resources. It's more heavyweight. It's cleverer than many, many other applications. Judging it by the same standard, you're going to get weirdness. Problem here is that an executive is shown the notice. So he spins up a V-team. He gets every great engineer he can find on the problem. He puts his tenacious bulldog engineer to drive the thing forward. And 6 months later, they find out we are indeed being put into background restricted mode. Now, what'd they miss? They didn't identify what the gap was. They didn't figure out what their tolerance for a solution was. And they had no idea if they would be able to solve the problem. It took 1 month with the bright light of day showing this to others to say, oh, that's just the expected rate. That's what we would expect given our crash rate. How much human time wasted because an executive said jump. When you try to solve a problem, you need to know why. And the first thing you should do is say no. We'll get to how to do that later. All right, last one, engineering is lazy. And as I started off, this is the core of the point. You should never do any more work than you have to. As Aiken would put it, there is never enough time to do it right. Somehow there's always enough time to do it over. People will shortchange themselves on getting the thing done, but they'll throw tons of effort into rewriting it. And you go through a few of these cycles and you start realizing it's almost never worth it. Just iterate. Story time here is something called Jupyter Notebooks. I don't know if anyone's familiar with various analytics platforms, but the issue here was that we had 4, I think, different ways of pulling data and doing data analysis at Meta. We had versions that went on pure SQL. We had versions that went on Python. We had versions written in Hack. We had bespoke pipelines that would pull data directly from prod and shove them into dashboards. The trouble with this is that every one of them had a slightly different capability. Every one of them had different limitations. So it comes time to take one of them and add to it. We need to add a new feature. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to establish a new standard, and that standard is going to solve all of the problems of the universe, and no one will ever reinvent anything again because our standard will be the best one. And all you've done is create a 5th problem. As XKCD puts it here, 14 standards, let's make a 15th. So what could have happened? Could have built a new product. Could have based our workflow on just the data pipeline. Pick that one, make all the engineers switch. Huge amount of work. Or we could have started from scratch. Build a new thing that satisfies everyone's requirements. How well does that ever go over in an engineering organization? You're all just going to change tomorrow. It's not going to happen. What we figured out was that 90% of what was missing was a UI. This system over here, Daiquiri, didn't have a notebook-based workflow. It could only run one script, and it could only run one script in one language. This one over here, Bento, had notebooks, could run many, many scripts, but it didn't support the same sources. Well, so we just need this UI to work for the other product. Minuscule changes, very small changes, a plugin interface, and a little bit of authoring. And instead of reworking the universe and spending years trying to deliver this new product, everybody's happy. You still have 4 different ways of analyzing code, but 2 of them share a UI now. Now you want to bet how long it takes for the other two to share the UI? They both work. Why not? And since we did a little bit of investment to make it a pluggable interface, we bit that second bullet, it's not going to be as hard to put this UI on the third and the fourth different platform. If we need to evolve forward, hey, we can probably put that new one on the same UI. Lesson here is about evolutionary change. Revolutions don't hold in engineering. Revolutions are for scientists. They're for people who can afford to fail 50 times and then hope one works. Engineering is about little changes. Make a small change, check to see whether it worked, make another small change, check to see if it worked. Use things you already know are useful to your customers. Fit them into the gap. Maybe you have to stand down the edges. Maybe you've got to cut the corners. But don't just throw human time at it just because you can. Solve the need, the requirement, not an arbitrary future vision of what the requirement might eventually be. All right, so that's thinking like an engineer, and that's a preface to the rest of this. Second bit is about dealing with management, because now we're engineers. We're going to be lazy. We're not going to look like we're busy all the time, but there is going to be some manager somewhere who wants to micromanage and tell us exactly how we should spend our time, and you're not doing enough lines of code, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, we've all met those guys, gals, people. I call this the fine art of being useful, because the trick to management is understanding that managers are just people, but they have managers, and their managers are just as unreasonable as they are. So what you have to think about, this is a quote from the satires. I'm sure most people are familiar with it, even if they don't know the Latin. Who watches the watchers? Well, I, with some liberties and Google Translate, prefer who manages the managers. Another story. One of my good friends at Meta had a manager who didn't know what to do with his time. Kept asking for random things. You should have done this 6 months ago. Now, I'm not going to name names because not my story. I did get permission to share it, though. This manager said, this is the most important problem you could possibly be working on. You should put all of your effort on this solution. Manager played product owner. They had regular status updates. They produced reports. They even presented this to the rest of the team several times. Trouble was, eventually, the manager passed this idea by his manager because he was very proud of himself for suggesting this. The manager stakeholder says, that's worthless. We're never going to use that. Why are you wasting your time? Manager does a 180. Why are you working on this? Well, you told me to, I merely suggested it was a good idea. You're supposed to be the engineer. There is a sort of manager that only exists to be in the middle and not cause waves. I call them goldfish. You cannot rely on that goldfish being really right about what the right next step is, so you have to figure it out for yourself. You cannot take them as the voice of truth. You have to test the waters. You have to be loud, vocal, transparent. Work with other people who have been in this space before. Talk to your stakeholders. Figure out whether the thing you're building will land. Because when you don't, you get steamrolled. And you'll take the brunt of that. Doesn't matter how good the work you did was, doesn't matter how perfect you made the adherence to that particular requirement. If the requirement was crap, you'll pay for it. And it won't be the manager because the manager did what he was asked. He was just reporting status and then telling you it was a bad idea. But you've now wasted your half or your quarter or your week or your sprint, depending on how you measure. As I said, managers are human. But that means that if you're going to try and facilitate your manager, you have to understand who they are. If you want to get the most out of yourself, you have to only interrupt yourself when it's going to be something that gets them off your back. Now, personally, I look at this in terms of archetypes. Your particular manager might not quite fit in, but I think these are some pretty solid archetypes I'm going to present. And the relationship with your manager and understanding what they're trying to get out of it frees you up from doing a lot of extra work to accomplish your goals. This is my first archetype. I call them the forever manager. Disregard gender here. I tried to alternate genders, but anybody can turn out to be this kind of a manager. Usually this is someone who started at the bottom of an organization. They started in the copy room and now they're a manager or director. Or they used to work in the print shop, or they were a janitor. They've always got a story. They'll tell you it. They've been there 20 years. But the thing is, they hit a point where they're comfortable. And they don't want to move up. They're not trying to make waves. They're in it for the long haul. Sometimes they're close to retirement, sometimes not. But the point is that they're there to keep the peace. They know every rule in the book. They know exactly what the requirements are, but they've learned exactly which ones they can bend and break. You want to get the most from this manager, you have to be as clear as glass. Over communicate on everything. Make sure they are in on every decision. Give them the chance to understand why you made the choices you made, because they'll defend you, because they don't want to make waves any more than you do. They won't make decisions for you, though. So what you want is for them to give you the flavor and the perception on what you've delivered. You want to seek their advice. You ask them for a decision, they're going to waffle. They're not going to give you anything. They may point you at somebody else. But if you ask them for what they think of something, they'll give you an answer, and it'll be an honest answer almost always. These people are also kind of like Teflon. They know where every body is buried. Nothing will stick to them. So you cannot blame them for your problems. Second one, and I'm sure there's a lot of this one in the room right now, because they tend to be the engineers who like to go to conferences or the managers who like to go to conferences, what I call a reluctant manager. These are usually very senior engineers or mid-level engineers who couldn't move up in any way but being promoted, or who could have moved up if they were at a company that supported that kind of thing, but instead get shoved to management. They'd really rather be coding. They'd really rather just still be in the trenches. And they'll try sometimes when they're in those conversations with upper managers and directors and VPs to speak on behalf of the team like they still work as part of the team. They'll make technical commitments if you're not careful with them. The way to get the most out of these folks is that they need to feel like they are a collaborator. They can't feel excluded or they will take it out on you. So you need to include them in discussions, maybe not in decision-making, but in the discussions themselves. They have to feel like they had the context. You have to lead into your conversations with the challenging part. This is what was interesting. And then explain why you went to your solution, because that's how they will engage and memorize those solutions, and then they'll parrot those. They will share those with the rest of the world because it makes them feel like they are still on the team. And meanwhile, it's your words. Meanwhile, you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again because this manager is going to do it for you. If you need something from them, you have to be explicit because they will not read vague hand-waving of what might be useful any better than your coworkers will. You have to ask them for things. I need an approval to travel next week. Not, I'd like to go to this conference. Because they'll just say, okay, conferences are cool. I like conferences. But it'll sit in their inbox because they aren't going to look for it. It's not the way they function. All right, next one, and this one's my personal favorite. Some of the best managers I've ever had fall into this archetype. It's what I call the empire builder. Empire builders usually are younger managers. Not always. Sometimes you get folks who get a little hungry later, but usually these are young people. Late 20s, early 30s, climbing fast, building relationships, moving and shaking. Sometimes if you get bankers who come over to engineering, this is what they tend to look like as managers. They want to grow, and they're going to get bigger, and they're going to build their empire. A hallmark of this is that they will never agree to anything explicitly. They'll also probably never say no. They will seek more information. They will look into it. They will find out if there are stakeholders who might need to be consulted, but they'll never tell you yes. They'll never tell you no, but they'll never tell you yes. They'll tell you what the risks are. They're going to leave it to you to make your own decisions, which is a powerful thing. if you've got good judgment. If you're an engineer and you really understand the world that you are working in, these are the managers who will let you build great things. These are the managers who will get out of your way and let you put down the work. These aren't the managers who are going to make you grow. They're going to let you grow, if that makes any sense. But they expect trust in return. You don't question these folks. You don't push back on them. You go and you follow along because their coattails are big and you can hold on to them, and they will continue to make space for you to grow as long as you stay with them. If you're going to deal with these managers and get the most out of them, you need to focus on articulation of scope because they don't want to. Again, they never say no, they never say yes. So you need to draw those boundaries. You need to refer anything that comes in from the outside to them first, because that's where they're going to thrive. They're never going to overcommit you. They're not going to say yes or no. But if they know about the ask, they're going to push for more people to join you on this wonderful journey, because they're building an empire. They're going to ask for headcount. And if they need somebody to do something, if you want to follow along with them, you're going to volunteer. Now, maybe you're not the perfect person for it, but they're going to remember that you're willing to help. And that's going to get you your next opportunity. It's going to get you assigned to the multi-platform tiger team that's going to lead you to great things. This is the sort of person you follow to promotion. This one, I'm going to say, is a mixed bag. This is what I call the tyrant. And I loved this picture, so he had to become the tyrant. He was not originally the tyrant. I generated him for one of the other groups, but he's too good. Usually these folks are middle managers. Sometimes they get to top executive positions. Those companies don't succeed very well because you can't manage a big company as a tyrant. Eventually people will stop following you. These people tend to be the directors, the VPs, the senior directors, senior managers. They have power and they know how to swing it around. They tend to be focused on deadlines, process, reporting, status updates. This is the guy who calls you and every other engineer into the room so that you can each deliver a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation of exactly how your metrics went over the last month. Do they care if you succeeded? Do they care if the metrics are good? No, but the report had better damn well be on my desk. Now, you'd think that was always stifling, but it turns out that these guys are great at running cover for you and for themselves. If you give these folks options that you already agree with, that are vetted by the team, they'll commit to those and they will die on that hill for you. They won't die because they're actually usually very, very good. But they will fight for those opinions, and unless another tyrant overrules them, they'll usually win. You have to give them the way to save face when that doesn't work out, though. If they take the blame, they'll stop supporting you. They can be very petty people. They'll exclude whole organizations from their planning if they are too regularly thrown under the bus by those groups. So you have to give them an out. Even if that out is, well, the metrics changed, we couldn't have known. That's an out. But if you blame them, if their name comes up as the one at fault, don't expect them to help you in the future. Another thing is they don't take ultimatums. If you tell them they have to do something, they'll say no. They'll in fact say no and. You have to communicate in trade-off and then go by what they say. You have to say, this is the cost of A and this is the cost of B. Both are cromulent options. Pick one, Lisa. All right, this is the last example, and this one I'm sure everybody has dealt with at one time in their life, whether or not they have put this name to them or not. This is someone who I call the executives. Now, executives tend to be just that. They tend to be the executives in your organization. Usually they are either a career employee or they are a founder of your company. These are rarely people who've been there for a year and maybe they'll leave next year. People who really fill this role will die in their chair if you let them. I like to say they're serious 120% of the time. They may joke, but they don't take jokes. They don't believe them. They won't listen to them. Think Superintendent Chalmers, all right? Just no funny bone whatsoever unless they're the one telling the joke. The hallmark here is that an executive can always and will always be able to find an answer to your question. If you ask them to decide, they will either decide or tell you how to make your decision. Every time. You ask them chicken or fish, they answer fish. They don't flub, they don't consider, they don't have to, They know the answer. And if they don't know the answer, they can tell you exactly what metric will make that decision for them. And that is powerful. Because if you bring a conundrum to these folks, they're going to make the decision one way or the other. And the funny thing about the executives is they're right more often than they're wrong. I don't know how they do it. You can bring them, I have a green light switch and another green light switch, and they're going to pick one of them and be right. It's a mystical superpower. You want to get the most from these folks, give them the best information you have. Solid numbers, no estimates, no guesstimates, solid numbers, good information. Give them digests of everything you know. Bring realistic options as part of your proposals. Don't come with problems. These are the folks who love to say, I don't want problems, give me solutions. Well, it's true. They don't want to try and come up with solutions. They want to decide which solution is best. Come with a few options, they will pick one. And when you need something decided and you want it to never be argued about again, this is your guy or gal. Last one, and this is because I've been harping on managers. Your managers do actually need you. Management is a lonely job. The quote that I'm going to use here is, not having all the information you need is never a satisfactory excuse for not starting the analysis. What I'm saying is, your managers are going to ask you for things that they've been asked for. Your stakeholders are going to want stuff that you don't know how to deliver yet, answers that you don't know how to get. It is never an excuse to say we don't have that data. That is a requirement to be satisfied, not a reason not to start working. If you don't know what the data says, put boundaries on what data you need and go after that. All you've got is more problems, and you can fix those eventually. So story time here. For anyone who works on Android, you know what an ANR is. Application not responding. For anyone who doesn't, basically it's a stall. It is a point where you are trying to use the app, it doesn't work for whatever reason. Now, there's a lot of variety to this, but what you'll all know is that when that happens, you don't get a lot of information about what was going on in the system. You get a bunch of stack traces, if you get that. In our case, we're dealing with billions of people. And when you're dealing with billions of people, you lose a lot of data, and you have a huge number of ANRs. And the problem is that you have to first start with passive. You have to start with this passive look at the world. Now, we could have said, well, ANRs are just a hard problem. We're going to try to reproduce these, but we're not going to be able to solve them. Or we're going to lower our top-level memory usage, CPU usage, but we can't fix this. But how bad is this problem? We don't know. That's not good enough. So what we said is, well, what don't we know that we need to know? Was a crash from an ANR? Well, that's something that we didn't know. So we went after that. Well, what was the app doing right before the ANR? Well, the ANR trace won't tell you. It'll tell you what happened immediately after. So let's record some things durably so that we know where the ANRs came from. This gave us a very high-level view, but it didn't tell us what the app was trying to accomplish. It told us what the app happened to do. So what worked better than that was we actually started tying into the core looping construct. We put hooks into the main thread looper, and we recorded everything that the main thread was asked to do. This let us dig into that data. The problem here is that what would happen if you were asked to do this and you proposed that main thread looper to start with? Did you know how big the problem was? Did you know why you were trying to solve it? Did you know what the impact of solving it was going to be? You try to sell 6 months of 5 people's work to someone over a theory that maybe you could track this thing, you get a no. So you want to support your manager first. You have to get them the numbers to give you a yes. Go after the size of the problem. Put boundaries on it. Put clear, defined characteristics of that problem. Because if you want the head count to solve it or the breathing room to solve it, even if you don't know how bad the problem is, your first step has to be proving there's actually a problem. So the lesson here, at least to my mind, is don't try to get your managers to sell big bang projects. Give them the support they need to give you leeway to do stuff. Build good enough, then build better. This tends to turn up in things like future-proofing. Oh, we're going to put a bunch of extra features into this, and maybe they're going to be useful because eventually we might need that stuff. I believe the phrase is, you're not going to need it. Yagni, if I remember right. You can build against every known possible thing. You can start from what someone asked for, and you could polish your tooling later. But when you do that, you're not going to solve the need. You're going to solve your current understanding of the need. What you need to focus on instead is finding that gap and then building to the gap, not the ask. You need to understand what the actual requirement from your users, from your system, from your stakeholders is. Understand the need and solve user pain. Don't just go off of what they asked for. Build incrementally, sell it incrementally, deliver it incrementally, and solve real problems instead of the thoughts you have. And I know none of that sounds lazy. I get it. Not everything we can do can be perfectly lazy, but you'll do a lot less work if you do it iteratively than if you keep trying to sell big solution after big solution and get shot down and shot down and shot down. All right, last one is saying no. This is my last section here. I consider this to be the most critical skill of every engineer and really any professional ever. This is for anyone who notices, this is a take on a Dr. Strangelove quote. Saying no, or how you should learn to stop worrying and embrace the minimum. Busy for an engineer is waste. It doesn't matter what you're doing to just keep yourself doing stuff. If there isn't a purpose to what you're doing, go take the time. Don't just spin. Don't just keep working. Do what needs doing and disconnect. Now, this picture here is from a scene in Dr. Strangelove where they've got all of the members of the B-52 bomber, I think it's a B-52. They're all unpacking their med kits, and they're all doing inventory, and they're all going through their checklists, and he's just on the radio, Slim Pickens here is on the radio, talking them through everything that's in there. Now, why would you do that? Well, they got 14 hours to kill, and you don't want them bored, so you give them busy work. Engineering isn't like that. There isn't a hard deadline, and there never should be. You're not working for the next 10 hours. You're solving a problem. And yeah, maybe there's a problem to solve after that. But don't go looking for those problems. And I've actually got a slide on that here in a bit. Another relevant Aiken's Laws of Spacecraft Design quote here. Oh, sorry. When in doubt, estimate, in an emergency guess, and then go back and clean up the mess when the real numbers come along. So the story here is about crash triage. I'm going to skip through this one and give you the high points. The basic problem here is that we have this gigantic monorepo. And that's a double-edged sword, as anyone who's tried to build a very big repo goes. You don't have to manage dependencies, but you have to build a lot of code. But this means we have hundreds of thousands of builds a day. We have new crashes every day. We have all manner of different people trying to make our app better and breaking things. My group works with app reliability, so we triage all of this. And we have to understand enough to decide what to do to fix these crashes as they come in. And it always boils down to one of two options. Either you can triage it to a team that might or might not have any capacity, or you can try and fix it yourself. And the thing is, if you put your headphones on and you put your head down and you just fix every bug that comes across your plate, you're going to fix some bugs, but no one else is ever going to see that you fixed a bug. It's not a specialized skill. Everybody's responsible for bugs. But in this case, the leverage point is We've got a group of people who constantly switch code bases, who look at big pictures and top level and the top level metrics. That's specialized. And that specialized skill ends up giving us a leverage point. It means that if we spend 20 minutes triaging, we can leave the fixing to someone who's more able to fix this problem because they probably were involved in writing the code. They already know that code base. It may take me 20 minutes to solve one problem. It may take me 10 hours to solve that one problem. If I can hand it to the guy who caused the problem, it may take him 5 seconds. But finding that guy is hard. So I specialize. Specialization always beats effort. Do the thing that nobody else can do. Do the thing that is of value to your organization that isn't well-trodden ground. There are 1,000 engineers writing software. Be the one who writes the kind of software that organization needs. Be realistic. Now, in this case, he's jumping off a plane to land a nuclear bomb. Not the most realistic thing. This is a quote I like. There's no justification for designing something one bit better than the requirements dictate. I'm going to skip over the Kotlin conversion. Anyone who's done that knows the pain of nulls and annotations. The point I'm trying to make with this, though, is that if you are going to do something painful, put guard posts in for you. Put nets underneath your work. Put in the automation. Put in the test cases because you'll save yourself a whole lot of pain and it'll all go faster if you do that stuff ahead of time. It's taken us 3 years to do this conversion on a mono repo of millions and millions and millions of lines of Java to Kotlin. We're very close to the end. We would have barely gotten started, except that we already had all this infra. And the big lesson is don't go looking for problems. Don't try to make more work for yourselves. I struggle to see the benefit of converting to Kotlin. Maybe some of you have a different experience. For us, it's mostly the file extension. Cost us a whole lot of time, a bunch of sevs, a bunch of null pointer exceptions, and at the end of the day, we're in a different language. But there's no neutral value to our users or anyone else to be in a different language. And the last one is communicate. This I want you to drill into your minds as an engineer. This quote right here. A good presentation of a bad design will fail eventually. A bad presentation of a good design fails immediately. It doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are. Doesn't matter how much value you think you contribute. Doesn't matter how smart you are. If you do not learn to deliver your work in a way that is digestible and agreeable to those who hold the purse strings, you've already failed. Now, I've got a couple bullet points here. They'll all be online. I'm just going to go through them quick. Participate in meetings or don't attend. Avoid assigning fault to anyone. Take responsibility, not credit. And that means, yeah, I'll do that, but we had a success. And history is written by the victors. Learn to write. Learn to put your words in prose. Learn to deliver them as presentations, as documents, as notes, as probably not emails because no one uses email anymore. If you write it down, you can then reference it again. I've got the obligatory XKCD here. The origin of all knowledge is in someone referencing something that someone wrote about, someone referencing something that someone wrote. Be this virtuous cycle for your organization. Build that knowledge and your voice will ring louder than others. All right. Questions, answers, angry heckling.